Welcome to Truth, Money, and Freedom. Today is Saturday, March 30th, 2019. And I want to share a story with you that's on Zero Hedge. 70% of consumers with credit cards say they can't pay it off this year. That's a systemic problem. It's getting worse. And we'll go through some data here real quick. I don't want to read the whole story once again. I'm trying not to do really long podcasts, so I apologize when I'm long-winded, but usually I'm conveying some important information. So if you can hang in there, it's great. But basically, we have the issue with 90-day delinquency strikes on people's credit reports. And this is, you are watching in slow motion the death of the middle class. Basically, this is the middle class. This is a very large section or swath through the middle class. And basically, with this type of data, you have to couple it with something else to actually make sense of it. In this case, it's the value of the dollar. I'll get into that in just a second here. But this is a real crisis that's actually happening in America. I mean, people cannot, keep up with their credit card, um, partially because of interest, but partially because the dollar has dropped in value. And I'll go through that in just a moment here. But it's this chart here says, I mean, this is very disturbing. When do you think you could pay off your credit card debt? Within a year, 30%. 1 to 2 years, 27%. 2 to 3 years, 16%. 3 to 4 years, 8%. I suggest anything within after that 1 to 2 years is not realistic anyway, because the interest is just going to swallow them. It's going to eat them alive, and they know this. I mean, they understand this. But if we go down here, this is where it gets even more interesting to me. Um, which of the following expenses have you added to your credit card debt? Groceries is the number one thing. Groceries. That's really disturbing. People are going into debt buying food. Gang, this is not a good sign. This really isn't a good sign. Now, I understand using a credit card to go get groceries and then paying off the credit card at the end of the month. I understand that. In fact, that's what I do. I don't pay interest on my groceries, but basically, it's a serious problem when people are going into debt to buy food. That is probably the biggest alarm besides the bond yield curve, that something very bad is coming. Online shopping, 48%, eating out, 44%, retail shopping, 43%, car repairs, 40%, vacation expenses, 31%, medical bills, 30%. That's another disturbing one. Home repairs, 24%, job loss, so they're starting to live on their credit cards, 14%, other 9%, childcare, 4%. Digging out of debt. Very, very difficult thing to do. The best thing to do is to not get into debt in the first place. But I realize that there are circumstances that are unforeseen that can cause a problem like this. But that's why virtually anyone will tell you it's really good to keep about 3 months worth of expenses on hand in cash. So these situations can be dealt with. But people can't afford to do that if they are, and by the way, I'll bring it back again. If they're putting 51 for basically 51% of the people are actually adding debt to their credit card, of the, not 51% of people, I should be more specific, 51% of the people in the study here, that ends up being 37 million Americans. 37 million Americans. Out of that, 51% of that number is actually adding debt to actually get groceries. Very disturbing. Like I said, guys, this is serious stuff here. These are the signs that people like us, like people like us, I'm sorry, people in Truth, Money, and Freedom, we look at this stuff. We understand the trends, and we see that as a very disturbing trend. Um, okay, but there's another issue here, and without going into, further um, information here specifically on the credit card debt, I want to get into why this is happening in the first place. And that is this: the purchasing power of the dollar. It's inflation, which is a hidden tax, and it is a tax. I mean, make no mistake. I mean, people might say, no, 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 no. That's just the cost of things going up. No, the cost of things aren't going up. The value of the dollar is going down. That forces the cost of things to go up. So and we'll get back to this in a second here. So the folks here who are spending, lots of money, going, or they're actually creating debt on their credit card to get things that they need to survive, like groceries. They may not understand why this is happening to them. Now, absent the possibility that Americans are not being responsible with their money. Now, because I do know some people that have done that in the past where they have made a purchase that they really couldn't afford, and then it just went downhill from there. I've seen that, but most cases this isn't the case in the middle class. Um, so in the middle class, you basically have people who have been working. They still work. They're getting yearly raises. But the raises aren't keeping up with the real inflation. Remember now, I've said before, the federal government and the Federal Reserve state that inflation's at 2%. That is a lie. That is an absolute lie. Um, this is so important to understand. The real rate of inflation, according to John Williams at Shadow Stats, using the 1980 numbers. In other words, you include gasoline, you include groceries, you include medicine, you include pharmaceuticals, you include the cost of education. You throw all that back in because the current numbers they work off of now to determine inflation have removed all of that. In fact, to the best of my understanding, the only thing they're including now for the cost of inflation, as far as the government's concerned, it's important to understand that the government is always telling us what inflation is electronics and clothing. I don't know how much else is really in there. So with electronics, like televisions and computers and, radios, whatever, and then clothing, inflation's at 2%. But those of us who actually live in the real economy, we know it's much, much higher than that. But are you getting a 10% raise from your job every year? The answer is probably no. So you see, they're leeching the value of what they're paying you away. That's inflation, the hidden tax. So 10 years, working at your job and you're going, geez, 10 years ago I did so much better. I could afford this, I could afford that. I just can't afford anything anymore. Well, you know the reason now. It is literally the dollar is literally losing purchasing power because they're printing too many of them. That is the reason. Your government's doing this to you. That's why it's a tax. Your government is spending more money than it's taking in. Therefore, it must borrow money from the Federal Reserve above and beyond what it has the ability to actually tax for that fiscal year. That's why we have debt. And the more debt we accumulate, we should put the U.S. debt clock up here. Hang on one second here and take a look at that. USDebtClock.org. Gotta love that site. This is the reason. They've printed too much money. And we have more and more, and it doesn't matter if it's physical paper or if it's just digits on a computer screen. Because remember now, the Federal Reserve creates the base money. The fractional reserve lending happens at the banks, at the regular banks. So the debt load is just huge, and it brings down. And by the way, that number 22,166,000,000,000. Just seems like yesterday it clicked over to 22. Um, this graph here explains it all. In 1913, when the Federal Reserve was created, the dollar was worth 100 pennies in purchasing power. Now it's actually, was it 90? It's actually worth 3.7 cents now. The dollar is now worth 3.7 cents compared to 1913. This is the hidden tax inflation, and your government does this to you. So this is one of the things that I've talked about before on the YouTube channel, is those of you who believe in the conservative ideals, um, believe in, basically a smaller government, you guys really need to start speaking up because our government is becoming pretty massive. It has since 2001. It keeps growing, and the more it grows, the more it must feed. And so they are, and of course, they all want to claim they have lower taxes on the people. Well, what they're doing is adding to the debt. And when they add to the debt, they lower the purchasing power of the dollar. So you get it either way. Either they take it from you in taxes or they take it from you in inflation. And this is why we're having the problem with the middle class, because incomes never, ever, ever outstrip inflation. Never. So we're doing, as much as we can with what little money we have anymore, because groceries cost a lot more. Buying a car costs a lot more. Buying a house costs a lot more. I mean, sending your kids to college cost a whole lot more than when it did when I was a kid. Way more. Way, way, way more. Going to the hospital cost a lot more. Everyone knows that. Pharmaceuticals, getting your medications costs a lot more. Everything costs significantly more, and we don't have, our incomes did not go up with these expenses. It's that simple. It's a very simple equation. So they're leeching the middle class. They're killing off the middle class. We could call it democide almost, I mean, because they're literally taking away all the money from the middle class. Now, I know that they keep claiming that the economy is really good in the mainstream media. I am really tired of hearing that. That we've had an incredible, really, really good expansion, that the economy rebounded so heartily from 2008. It's not true. It's just not true. Now, the upper, 10% may have benefited from this dramatically, but once again, in a fascist society, those are the ones who will benefit. The upper 10%, you might say the upper 5% or something like that, they're richer. There's no doubt about it. But the middle class, we're getting killed off. And there's the reason why. It's very simple to understand. So those of you who are conservative, understand the Republican Party is not conservative because they will not shrink the size of government, which is what causes these problems. We need more money at the federal level because they keep growing the government. We need to literally tell them to stick to their mandate. This is what you guys, this is your mandate. This is your platform. Smaller government, lower taxes, more freedom for the people. That is the conservative platform. But we don't have that anymore. We have progressive Republicans, and they still call themselves conservative, which is a laugh. They're not conservative. They've not been conservative in a very long time. The last person that ran for president that actually said we have got to shrink government was Ron Paul. And that was it. Ron Paul back in 2008, Ron Paul back in 2012. Not even his son Rand went and talked about shrinking the size of government because he wanted to become president, and he knew that Ron Paul was maligned by the media by saying, hey gang, we need to bring down the size of government so we can bring down taxes. So the conservatives, yeah, we're going to lower taxes, but they keep increasing spending, which adds to this number right here, which kills us through inflation. So you see what it's like, guys? I mean, we think we know what we know, about what being a Republican is, but what being a conservative is all about. If you look at the national debt, you start to understand there's something wrong here because we cannot seem to bring that number down. And that's because we refuse to shrink the size of government. The Republicans won't do it. The Democrats certainly won't do it. I mean, the Democrats are all about growing the government too, but they're about growing it faster. So if we say, well, the Democrats, are going to grow faster, so I'm going to choose the lesser of two evils and go with the Republican Party, you understand they're still going to grow government. They're still literally going to kill off the middle class. And they're killing off the middle class to benefit the 10%. So once again, I know I'm going to get flamed in this video, but I'm just letting you know the facts here. This is literally the way I see it. The facts are right here. With the credit card debt, middle class is going into debt buying groceries, gang. This is pretty serious. Purchasing power of the dollar down to 3.7 cents now. 3.7 cents. This is serious. The Republicans have done this to us too. Now, I expect this from the Democrats. They're communist. They're progressive communists. They call themselves socialists. We're already socialist. They want to take us, over the edge to communism. Uh, but the Republicans are participating in this too. So, and I'm sorry, once again, I know I'm going to get flamed. I know people will be upset by me even saying that, but that's literally the way I see it. Well, at any rate, gang, that's, you know, I like to try and give you something to think about. That's what I like to do. And once again, this is from deep thinking, reading, studying, and basically, I believe in freedom. I believe in liberty. And I just don't see that coming from either of the major two political parties here in the United States. I don't see it. We can talk about, intangible freedom, the freedom to come home and crack open a beer, put at your feet and watch television. And some people say, well, I'm in America, I have the right to do that. Well, that's not really freedom. Not when literally you're going into debt to buy food. I mean, you've got a problem here. If you're going into debt to buy food to keep yourself alive, there's an issue. But don't worry, the government's going to come to the rescue and put the entire middle class on food stamps, raising once again the national debt because they don't have the money to do it. See what I mean? It's circular reasoning, and it doesn't work. This number keeps going up. Um, so just remember what I had talked about here with the purchasing power of the dollar. Keep track of that. I mean, it's really going down quick. Uh, Now, 2017 shows that it went down quite a bit, um, but I shudder to think if they add, any more to it. But I think it's 3.7 cents right now. 3.7 cents, gang. We got less than 4 cents purchasing power versus the dollar in 1913 when the Federal Reserve was created. So that's what overprinting of money and fractional reserve lending does to the middle class. It just kills them. Of course, it hits everyone else too, but the middle class are the ones who are actually dying off in this process. The poor have still been poor. Nothing's changed. Many of them are on government subsidies, so they, can survive that way. But the reason this goes up is because we've got that problem. Immigration brings that problem too. That's total of U.S. unfunded liabilities because they're really on the system, and this is unpayable, folks. This is absolutely unpayable. So I don't know. Maybe it's a good thing because this system will collapse. I guarantee it. No one will invest in U.S. bonds anymore. Dollars will be coming home. They will be coming home. Literally, they're coming home to roost. And it'll probably happen sooner than later, too, because the world seems to be flocking to the Chinese yuan. They have bonds that are used for trading oil, and you can, get gold off of their bonds, which we can't do here in the United States. So things are changing in the background right now, and the mainstream media isn't talking about it. But if you ever wondered why you can't afford to send your kid to school, well, it's because of this. It's this kind of nonsense. You know, you wonder why you're going into debt buying groceries, and that's becoming the norm. If you institutionalize the idea that it's normal to be constantly in debt, all you need to do is go back 40 years, and that was not the norm. People wanted out of debt. People didn't, they very seriously considered whether it was worth it to go into debt for whatever purchase they needed to make. People saved for things. We can't do that anymore. Middle class has been, basically removed from that option. I mean, it's not like we still have that option. Not when you're going into debt buying groceries. Um, all right. Well, I've been long-winded enough. Thank you very much for listening to me today. I just want to bring these realities to your attention from time to time, and I really appreciate those who listen to the end of the video because, I get all my thoughts out and then I get it off my chest, and it is something I want people to think about because we're headed down the wrong path. It's too late to turn around. So how do we deal with what's coming? And that's kind of what we're about in Truth, Money, and Freedom as well. Gold and silver and cryptocurrencies. We are not financial consultants. We are not financial consultants. But we do believe that these are probably how you will survive the coming reset. And there's lots of evidence for that too. We'll get into a podcast with that soon. Thank you once again. Have a blessed day, everyone.